Welcome to this edition of TZM Global Radio. I'm your host, Jim Phillips, or James Phillips from TZM Education. I'm going to be discussing a few things today, an awful lot based around the topic of education, but a couple of updates and various other bits and bobs. The opening to the show today was by They Might Be Giants. That song was called Meet the Elements. They're kind of a band who just piece together sciencey stuff and other bits and bobs education related and make it accessible for kids and make it fun for them. I think that in a sane education system we might have kids coming in and having a little dance and a boogie and a sing-song to something that actually fills their minds with something useful rather than some of the crap that they sing in schools now, but I won't go off on that tangent this early. Basically, first thing I'd like to do is say a massive thank you to the Vancouver chapter for having me over to deliver my talk on the history of coercive education at Z-Day, the world event Z-Day Vancouver in Canada. They are some frickin' awesome human beings and reminded me of the fact that the fortunate part of being involved in this movement is that I realise that no matter where I go on the face of planet Earth, all I need to do is hop online, find my local chapter of the Zeitgeist Movement, and I've found my new best friend. So they put on a really, really good event. I had a lot of fun, great speakers all day, and was really privileged and honoured to be there. A little amusing anecdote from this event was the fact that you might notice that I'm a little bit out of breath in the first couple of slides of my presentation. I thought I'd have enough time from the end, watching the end of Federico's presentation to be able to get on stage and do my thing, but I started to be introduced whilst I was still just getting up from my seat, so I had to run around the back of the venue to come on the stage correctly, and it became quite self-evident that I'd been doing research and preparing my lecture and other bits and bobs rather than actually staying fit because I was rather out of breath, but I think it went okay nonetheless, and we must laugh at these things really, otherwise we'll cry. And great events all around the world. I've watched a few of the presentations from different events going on around the globe. There was a couple of great ones in the LA one. Jen Wilding did one, forgive me if I get the title wrong here, it was basically about communicating the concepts of an RBE effectively. She actually completely stole a radio show I was going to do called Everybody's Right, basically coming at things from the angle of agreement rather than disagreement. So someone may make a point and you know what they're trying to get at, but they're obviously framing it within the context of this culture and what this culture offers as solutions, rather than the wider lens view and the solving of the root causes of problems. Jen has some brilliant examples that she uses in her talk, and I strongly recommend giving that a watch. One quick example would be someone says, oh, well, I believe you should work for a living. And you say, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Although when I got here, I already didn't work for centrally heated homes, cars, roads, taps, planes, trains, pretty much everything that basically sustains my way of life. So I didn't work for them. So working for what? For the betterment of our environment, for our culture, for our education system, for human values, or working on Wall Street really, really hard, making sure you plunder third world economies every day. It depends what you're working hard for, is what I'm saying. And usually most people will come around and say, yeah, well, it does depend on what you're working for. And it's at this point that I usually say that we would personally like to see the most sustainable and peaceful system possible in which human beings could live, and we would like to do this by addressing the root causes of problems in an objective manner, and we would like to work hard towards that aim. Is that something you'd like to work hard towards as well? Do you feel that that has merit? You know where the conversation's going, it's going to. Well, yeah, of course I would. And it's like, well, then we can't have a system where a footballer is paid 250 grand a week and a nurse is paid 15 grand a year, and say that we're really trying to achieve that aim. Most people don't agree with that. They're like, of course I don't agree with what Wayne Rooney's being paid every week to play football, but you think that free market capitalism and democracy are a good idea though, yeah? And they're like, oh yeah, of course I do. Well, pardon me, but free market capitalist democracy pays Wayne Rooney what the market says he's worth. He is worth more than a nurse that could save your child's life. So I'm sorry, but you can't disagree with that situation and then agree with the causal mechanisms that made it happen. It's like agreeing with war, but not like in guns. It's silly. So anyway, another criticism that's levied at the movement sometimes is that we over-intellectualize our message. So I try to keep in mind the humorous aspect when piecing together my Why I Advocate the Zeitgeist Movement video. This video is better to watch with the images because it does make it a little bit funnier, but nevertheless I'm going to include the audio from it now for you all to have a listen to. Big thanks to Ryan for piecing this together for me.
Hello, my name's James, and this is my Why I Advocate the Zeitgeist Movement video. Now I could go off on a big rant about a new social system, but you know what? I think a lot of people out there would just rather have a rather more, shall we say, humorous approach to this. Now, what shall I choose for my humour? It's got to be reasonably universal because I want it to reach most people. I know. Toilet humour. So, most of you out there have a toilet. If you take a dump in that toilet and then find the flush to be broken, do you A, take another dump in it, or B, get the flush fixed before you go for your next visit? That's right. If you answered B, you answered correctly. You would get the flush fixed. Put plainly and simply, that's exactly what we have to do, because you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. Just like you can't expect to take a shit in your toilet when the flush is broken, and then another one, and then another one, and another one, and another one, and eventually for the shit to not just flow all over your bathroom floor. So, instead, could we please have an intelligent resource management system based not on infinite growth, but maybe steady state economics, and a humane application of the best decision-making process we've ever come to know as a species, that being the scientific method, because it's emergent upon new evidence and new information, rather than stagnant, like much of human opinion can be. Then we may have the actual starts of what we could call a true civilization, because, in the words of Mr. Jacques Fresco, we're not civilized yet. A civilization that looks to solve the root causes of problems rather than papering over the cracks of a system that quite clearly doesn't work anymore. If we could start to do that, then imagine what we could be. We could be so much more than what we are now. The first change has to start with you, not someone else. It is not a measure of your social contribution to just arbitrarily put a cross in a box of what is little more than a popularity contest every 4 years. This idea of a resource-based economy is contingent upon you learning and contributing, not submitting. It's not a utopia, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's still going to be better than having shit all over your bathroom floor.
Hope you like that, guys. It's rather crude, but we've got to open up all avenues of communication. On to the next topic. That would be the One Planet project. Just to remind everyone out there that if you haven't signed up to this yet, you can do so by going to www.oneplanetproject.net. You should be able to find all the information there. It was well laid out by Cliff from Zeitgeist Vancouver, so I won't go around it again, although I would add one very important thing that wasn't mentioned in Cliff's address, and that is the very nature of the title, One Planet Project. The Zeitgeist Movement, love it as I may and care for labels not very much as I do, it is a bit of a wordy title. You say, I'm a member of an organisation called the Zeitgeist Movement, and people say, the what, and, then you end up on the back foot. If you say the One Planet Project, it's pretty obvious what you're after. And then it's just kind of like, okay, we have one planet. How are you going to do that then, mate? They know what you're after. They just want to know how you're going to get it done. The Zeitgeist Movement, you've got to say what the definition is and then say what you're after, and you're sort of having to chew into something. So I think the One Planet Project is a very catchy title. Not that I give a rat's ass about titles, as I said earlier, but the fact is that we live in a marketing culture. We are trying to sell an idea. We live in a sales world, and the One Planet Project is a very catchy title and something that people can find much more readily and easily accessible than the Zeitgeist Movement per se. So I feel that's also just a point that needs adding on there. But as you're all aware, the nature of this project is to get emails in response to some questions and bring a pack to people online that they can go and check out and have a look at some of the Zeitgeist Movement's materials. This also helped illuminate something that I can't believe I didn't think of. That is the issue of having a point of contact after you've delivered this information to somebody. For instance, when I was in a band, we used to go and play at a venue, and whenever we went there, we made sure that we took down everybody's email address that saw us play that show, so that we could put them on our mailing list and send them out something like a free track, and also information of when we'd be back in their town to play a future show, so that we could have a captive audience, so to speak. The fact that we set up stalls on the side of the street and give out leaflets and ask for nothing in return, it might seem nice, but you don't have that point of contact for that person again. If you get their email, then yeah, they can sign off, they can say, I don't want to be part of your mailing list anymore, but at least you have a way of contacting them after having a conversation with them, rather than having a half-hour conversation with someone in the street. It seems to go well, and we say, that went well. They go off. How do you know it went well? They could have thought you were a complete fruitcake and never take any notice of you again, or they could think it's the greatest thing ever and join up to the website straight away. We don't actually know, but at least with the email we know we have a point of contact to follow up our conversation. So I think this One Planet Project thing is a great idea. It's well thought out, and I would definitely encourage all members of the Zeitgeist Movement to get behind this and help make it a really big success. Quick report on an event I did at Ashland School in Berkhamsted in southeast England. I held an event for the whole of the school, which included 450 to 500 pupils, I believe, and teachers. It involved 4 presentations, some longer ones, some shorter ones. First weeks were on problems, the second weeks were on solutions, and the second week involved a full science and sustainability exhibition that I take into schools. The response was overwhelmingly brilliant. Very, very good questions asked by the kids. They came through to the exhibition and were really enthusiastic about the idea, and so were the teachers as well. The reaction of kids coming into the exhibition is fantastic. They just look around, they look at all of the technology that's actually feasible, that's actually possible. They look at it and they go, wow, you're telling me we can actually do that? And you're like, yeah, we can do that. No, well, why aren't we doing it? Well, it costs too much. Right. Well, money's dumb. You don't have to tell me, dude. Tell your teachers. And, of course, we go through a bit of a Q&A, and actually a couple of the teachers, although asking sort of some questions at the beginning, get round to the end and say, you know what, one thing he's got bang on is you're going to have to do something very different to us because we're screwing this shit right up, basically. And by the end, it's opened a few minds. Who knows? We'll see where those seeds go. Maybe they'll take root, maybe they won't, but at least they're being planted. So that was a really, really positive event. I've been invited back, so I've been to 4 schools, and I've been invited back to all of them. I don't think that's necessarily testament to me, I just think it's testament to the idea. It's an exciting concept. It's an exciting idea we're involved in, and it feels great to get out there and tell people about it. And once you start doing that, to be honest, it becomes addictive. It's what I love doing now with my life, and I think if you put your toe in the water, so to speak, out there, guys, and you phone up your local school and you get involved, then you'll find it just as enjoyable as me. One thing to mention when you are approaching your schools is don't go in there and say, "Hi, I'm from the Zeitgeist Movement and we want to get rid of money." Probably not a good idea. Go in there on the science and sustainability ticket. My approach is to phone the sixth form areas, which is sort of the higher school end, and ask if they have a sort of personal social development lesson or a citizenship studies lesson or whatever it might be. They usually have one once a week here in the UK. I don't know whether they have them in your area of the world, but it's a good little foot in the door and to get to talk to these kids just before they're about to go into the world and be plagued by debt for the rest of their life. So pick up the phone, Google your local schools, get their phone number, go through to whatever department you feel best, and go from there. I'm going to be putting up some materials on my site, which is www.tzmeducation.org, in the activism section, so that it's got tips on how you can go about approaching your school, letter templates, presentation templates, and basically everything you could possibly need. So that all you have to do is go online, find the details of the school, phone up and talk, and then book the date, go in, do the date, practice your presentations before you go in there, deliver them, answer some questions and leave. And you've delivered this concept to a group of young minds who are far less indoctrinated into this ridiculously stupid and outdated system than many of the adult world seem to be. So, can't be a bad day's work, really, can it? Okay. Couple more bits to talk about before I carry on that have just been buzzing around my brain. Some of them not particularly new concepts, but just need to be, I think, reiterated as good approaches that we could be using. One would be radio show phone-ins. Obviously, there's talk radio stations in all of our countries and all of our respective chapter areas, and some of these shows go out to as many as millions of people. If you can formulate your argument so that you get in there quick, fast, drop a logic bomb and leave, hopefully after dropping the website as well, then it's a really, really good tactic to use. I've done it once or twice with technological unemployment and planned obsolescence, where you run in there and you frame the argument from a completely different perspective to the narrow sort of culturally restrictive way that people tend to debate these things on the radio. You know, the debate is sort of framed within a particular context before it even gets started, especially when you're talking about unemployment. No, when you hear an unemployment debate on the radio, it's never got anything to do with technology or technological unemployment at all, usually. So you bowl in there and you deliver that, hopefully in the context of the movement, and hopefully that should reach a lot of people in one hit. Also, I went to my local pub today. Don't know why I've never done this before, because they've got a function room, and I went in there and basically said, are there any nights when you just not using your function room and I could use it? I can't pay because I'm a member of this organisation and we don't have any money, but I will obviously advertise it as well as possible and get as many people there as possible on a night when you didn't have anybody in there, and they'll come out and buy drinks, potentially. So I could be doing you guys a favour and you'd be doing me a favour, and you just have a little talk and you answer some questions, and it's a good way of reaching the public. About the only overhead you're going to have is the cost of printing up a few flyers and doing an event on Facebook. And the hire of the venue, so to speak, is free. So essentially it's a town hall meeting if you want. But it just seemed to me that I can't believe I didn't think of the route of function rooms and the fact that you can get them for free if it's in such a place as a pub or whatever you call that in your neck of the woods. So yeah, that's another good approach that members out there could be considering. Okay, well, I've got a few future shows lined up as well, based on several different topics. But the first one I'm going to do is based around a book called The Homework Myth by Alfie Kohn. I sticker up pages in my book so I can come back and reference them for later for things like this. And the thing ended up looking like a Christmas tree. It just had all of these little luminous stickers all over it. And as I was going through, I was just kind of thinking, the best thing that I could do with this radio show is pretty much to read the book out loud from start to finish, because it's such a resounding indictment on the current educational system's approach to education overall, but in particular homework, that is just excellent. It's a very, very good book. I didn't expect it to be quite as good as it was, but it really, really is absolutely brilliant. In fact, all of Alfie Kohn's books are excellent, and I strongly recommend to read any of them. They really do just provide all of the evidence and data and research to just say why, if what you're trying to do is to inspire creative, critical thinking, deep thinking about topics and tasks, and have that kind of population, then this state school system we have in many countries is just completely opposite to that. I think I've belabored that point quite enough in my previous presentations. But this is a very interesting book nonetheless that's honing in on one particular area, homework. So, firstly, it's important to point out what you are trying to achieve with education. What is it we want to educate our children predominantly to do? I would personally hope that it's to provide them with an intrinsic love of learning. That is, to love learning what they're learning for the sake of learning it, and not for some arbitrary grade, test score, or approval from authority figures or from parents or anybody else, but because they actually genuinely love learning. And also the ability to think deeply about a topic, to critically analyze information, to ascertain as to how truthful that information is, and to be able to solve problems and think outside the box, all of which our current educational system does not do. Put simply, you would need to invigorate a child's interest through human engineering. Now that sounds quite New World Order, but actually we're engineering humans all the time, through our TV programs, through our movies, through our parenting skills, through the environment we raise them in. So it's not the term that's the problem, it's how people go about doing it. And the fact that people actually don't admit to the fact that they're deliberately doing this means that they're not deliberately trying to foster the best intent in their children and raise the young to grow up to be critically thinking, empathic, problem-solving individuals. Of course, it isn't what the system actually requires. The system requires a population of work slaves. Now, I've been through this before in my lectures, but it's well worth pointing out again and again and again. The current coercive model of education is not designed to do anything different. You can put great teachers in it all you like, but if they still have the pressure of pulling through decent test scores and giving the schools decent rankings in the school tables, then you're just going to get the same problems all over again, because you have the pressure on people. It's the same thing out there with the pressure of people needing to make money to survive. When you have that pressure cooker out there, it limits the thinking of people, and it even limits their time to be able to do what they would want to do anyway for the greater good. It's not just society that has to undergo these changes, it is the school system as well, because they reflect each other. One can't exist without the other. It's that simple. I think this point was made very, very well by Jacques Fresco in some of his lectures in the 1970s, which I strongly recommend going back and taking a listen to if you can. This is an excerpt from one of those lectures about how to create an intrinsic love of learning in a child and intrigue through interest.
More children become interested in something because a prior group walks over and pays attention to that something. And it's hard to get to see that something, so they want to see it. So the schools are engineered to make a subject interesting. Instead of starting out with introduction chemistry, no kids are interested in chemistry. I mean, normal kids. You can't be interested in chemistry. Who the hell cares about H2O? Who cares whether water is composed of hydrogen and oxygen and that at a lower temperature freon gas condenses? Nobody's interested in that. So what you do is a guy comes into the classroom when these kids are 6 and 7 years old, and he or she comes into the classroom, and he takes a glass, 2 clear glasses, and he mixes 2 clear fluids together, and it turns blue. Then the kids look at it. They say, how the hell is that happen? We call that chemistry. See that? Hey, that's pretty good. Then they show a plate floating in the air, and the kids run their hand on it. That's called magnetic repulsion. You know what I mean? So what happens is they then become interested in the subject because they can use it. They can do things with it. But if you say, what is the yearly output of diamonds in the Kimberley diamond mine? Nobody gives a shit. Economic geography, what is Brazil known for? Nobody cares. Instead of having school teachers, what we would do is either ask the teachers or so arrange things so the teachers go back to school and they learn human engineering. How to take people with a given set of values and gradually manipulate the affairs in the environment. And I don't mean the dictatorial control. What I mean is to arrange events so people become interested. That's what I mean by human engineering.
We'll come back to the sort of educational paradigm and environment that we would want to see to try to reach a more collaborative, sustainable and peaceful world in which to live. But first of all, we need to run down the factors of the educational system that are quite simply hampering its progress towards those aims. Starting off with grades. When talking about grades, a very good book, again by Alfie Kohn, I would suggest for anybody to read on this particular topic, is Punished by Rewards. Lays out many of the studies that now show the detrimental effects that grades have. The first being a lack of interest in the topic in question, because as soon as you've achieved the grade, there's really no need to take an interest in that topic. You've already reached the required standards set by those in command. Number 2 is avoidance of challenges in order to get higher grades. 3 would be shallower thinking, no engrossed thinking about the topic at all, no long-term retention of information either, because you may as well just forget it as soon as you've finished the getting of the goodie. And fourthly, it creates anxiety in a child as well. We can see this by the fact that some children actually find stress so hard to deal with and the pressure so great from parents and school that they actually go to the lengths of even taking their own life. This is what our system does in its extremes to turn out human product. The underlying subconscious psychology of the system for grading is, number 1, sorting kids into categories for production in the workplace and pigeonholing kids for that workplace. Number 2, motivation for rewards, so extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic interest requires making the task more interesting, as was pointed out in that example by Jacques Fresco, especially if you want creative thinking and thinking outside the box, so to speak, outside the margins, then grades are absolutely no good for this. Just like money is no good for this as well. That's well pointed out in examples given by Daniel Pink in his book Drive. Strongly recommend giving that a read as well. And a few of these examples were brought up in my presentation Z-Day 2011 in London, so feel free to go online and give that a watch, as the evidence speaks for itself. The third reason for grading is to control behaviour, so that if you have not made the task interesting, then you can just dangle a carrot. It's basically a way of ensuring that bad teaching can be covered up by creating a reward mechanism. It's classic operant conditioning 101. There's actually a concept in the English school system called golden time, whereby if you've been a good boy or girl all day, then the last 15 minutes of the day you get golden time to basically do what you would like to do in class and learn something that you would like to learn. I would basically postulate that if anything, that relationship should be reversed, so that there's 15 minutes of shit you don't want to do and the rest of the day is stuff that you want to learn. But, that's just me who wants to create a world full of interest and intrigue, creativity and peace and harmony. But, I suppose I'm just a fucking hippie. So, on to homework. The assumption out there is that homework helps learning in many different ways, shapes and forms. And we're going to go through that now. But first of all, it should be always remembered that a lot of the links given by those in favour of homework are in relation to testing and grades, which have been shown to have a detrimental effect on the intrinsic love of learning. However, it should be pointed out that there is actually a link between homework and learning, a positive correlation that is, but only in the final years of school, so towards the sort of 15, 16 mark. There is no link in any way for the younger age ranges. It is based on a complete and total cultural assumption and nothing else. One example of some of the research that backs up that statement is pointed out in the book, The Homework Myth. Quote, "Consider the results of the 2000 math exam. Fourth graders who did no homework got roughly the same score as those who did 30 minutes a night. Remarkably, the scores then declined for those who did 45 minutes, then declined again for those who did an hour or more. In 8th grade, the scores were higher for those who did between 15 and 45 minutes a night than those who did no homework, but the results were worse for those who did an hour's worth, and worse still for those that did more than an hour. In 12th grade, the scores were about the same regardless of whether students did only 15 minutes or more than an hour. Results on the reading test, too, provided no compelling evidence that homework helped." We can also see a similar trend internationally. Quote, "In the 1990s, the trends in international mathematics and science study, TIMS for short, became the most popular way of assessing what was going on around the world, although its conclusions can't necessarily be generalized to other subjects. Again, the results were not the same in all countries. Even when the focus was limited to the final years of high school, where the contribution of homework is thought to be the strongest, usually it turned out that doing some homework had a stronger relationship with achievement than doing none at all, but doing a little homework was also better than doing a lot. This is also known as a curvilinear relationship on a graph. It looks like an upside-down U. But even that relationship didn't show up in separate series of studies involving elementary school students in China, Japan, and 2 US cities. There was no consistent linear or curvilinear relationship between the amount of time spent on homework and the child's level of academic achievement. These researchers even checked it to see if the homework in the 1st grade was related to achievement in the 5th grade, the theory being that homework might provide gradual long-term benefits to children. Again, they came up empty-handed." Close quote. Basically, if any homework is going to be set, then it certainly shouldn't last very long, which is not the way we're doing it at the moment. But I would also argue that if any homework is set, then it should also only be set to raise their level of intrigue, raise their level of interest. If you're not doing that, then what are you doing? I wouldn't say you're doing any form of meaningful education. The next argument for homework is that it provides a connection between the school and parents, as well as instilling responsibility, and, you may as well get used to it whilst you're young, because there's going to be more of it coming later. Right, I'll deal with these one at a time. First of all, the connection between the school and parents. The notion of the connection between family and school is not needed through homework. Relevant feedback is surprisingly more relevant. More relevant, that is, than handing back an arbitrary grade or test score. When I say relevant feedback, obviously I'm talking about the child's genuine areas of interest and intrigue, and how they're actually doing, how they're enjoying school. So homework quite obviously doesn't supply a decent or relevant form of communication between the parents and schools. The next would be responsibility, or time management, or whatever you want to call it. This does not actually happen through homework. Responsibility is not the same as obedience. The child does not decide what the child wants to do, How can that be passed off as responsibility? It's surely just following orders, and following orders away from authoritarian rule. It's a sort of pseudo-religious mentality that basically says, now don't misbehave when we're not watching, because we're always watching. Homework volume assigned does not manifest into responsible adult behavior. There's no connection between those two. It's an assumption based on culture, not on evidence. As for time management, it doesn't really help much with this either, as it has to be done when a parent says so. If the parent is supposed to step back to allow the child to take on the responsibility of time management, then why contact the parent to scold them for their child's homework not being done? It obviously is the parent's job to time manage their child, so the factory of authority can be continued at home. So it's a double-edged sword, basically. It should only be assigned to initiate deep thinking or dealing with a concept, because I want my family to have time to experience being a family together and do something maybe that we choose to learn about, that we choose to do as a family. The school gets my kids for 6 hours a day. I want them for the rest of the day. I don't think that's too unreasonable. And the last issue to deal with would be the get used to it issue. More of it will follow, so study routine must be built in early. That's like saying you're going to have injections when you're older, so you may as well have them every day until then, just so you get used to it. Besides, study skills can be acquired at school, as well as the previous point that if it is through interest that you want to study something, then you're more likely to do it and do a more thorough job. Studying for the sake of practicing to study for homework is circular logic that assumes that forced homework is a good thing. It's a ridiculous idea, and there's no evidence for it. The assumption is cultural. Besides, what are you studying and why? Why are you doing it? These are the important questions that need to be asked before we start going around assigning homework and infringing on family life. Part of this claim is to reinforce that learning should take place at home and is not just something that happens at school. Making kids learn academic content at home will make kids realize that they have to learn academic content at home. Well, yes, of course you will, because you just set it. That's the whole reason they have to learn it at home. You're making it into a chore. You're not making it into something that should be an area of interest, that one day later they will uncover some wonderful piece of information or a new area of interest or intrigue. A very popular publication in the teaching world in favour of homework is called The Classroom Instruction That Works, Research-Based Strategies for Increasing Student Achievement. The studies that it correlated for its argument in favour of homework were: Study 1, a correlation amongst higher age students and grades, not younger ages. And the correlation is with grades, which are detrimental to lateral thinking, remember, which is outside the box thinking, that is, and of course as well as killing the long-term intrinsic motivation towards learning. Study 2 found no correlation for younger age ranges, but it did find a negative effect on their attitude towards learning. Study 3 showed a number of techniques from teachers whose students scored highly on standardized tests. These teachers set more homework, but no contribution was attributed to the homework explicitly. In fact, they even state that the other unnamed factors could have more of an effect than those on the actual list, such as decent teaching techniques. Study 4 measured how much time was spent on homework by a particular group, but did not actually find out if it had a positive effect. But more must be better, right? I mean, never mind quality. It's all about quantity, of course. Study 5 involved only 6 children with learning disabilities on their rote learning abilities and the effect that homework had on a test the following day. Mostly these results came back negative, yet they were included as a positive retroaction. We can see here that the conclusion had already been arrived at before the actual research took place, and that subsequent research was going to validate that conclusion one way or the other. Many of the structures of the school system are born out of the ideas of operant conditioning and reinforcement. Homework is not fun. Why would a kid like to learn it if they hate it? It's based on a mechanistic process, not a motivation via attitude towards the topic in question through intrigue. Reinforcement is not understanding the topic, it is just doing for doing's sake. A deeper motivation is through intrinsic interest. This can easily be inspired through a teacher who's passionate about the topic in question, which is a hard thing to do if you are paid, and therefore it is reinforced in the extrinsic way, which, as stated before, is not a very good way to increase the intrinsic desire in a student to learn. Mechanism is not just dangling a meaningless grade in front of someone's face that has no information that is relevant to the task completed. It can also be viewed as the demonstration of how something is cool, and then the venture on the part of a play-dumb teacher to help find the answers with the students through collective intrigue and investigation. A teacher, obviously, who stands at the front of the class and dictates what the truth is really not doing teaching. Teaching is about empowerment. It is about giving the students the tools to do the job themselves so that they feel autonomous in the tasks that they're doing. Autonomy has been shown to be a great facilitator of happiness within someone about what they're doing. If they feel they have control over their own lives and control over what they're learning, they're far more likely to want to learn it, be good at learning it, succeed at it, and in turn be a happier individual in what they're doing. This point is again echoed by Alfie Kohn. Quote, "The benefits of experiencing a sense of autonomy range from better physical health to better emotional adjustment, and in the case of students also include greater academic self-confidence, which is associated with more successful learning. Apart from the practical benefits of being able to make choices, one could argue from a moral perspective that all people ought to have some control over their own lives. There are limits, of course, notably with respect to age, but even children should be able to make decisions about matters that concern them, except when there is a compelling reason to deny them that right." Close quote. But then, of course, homework is also supposed to promote individual learning skills. Well, yes, that would be okay if classrooms were a completely collaborative affair, but I would say that they're hardly the bastion of collaboration. The classroom is a competitive place, from grades to praise to punishment. The standard school classroom is already an individualistic affair. They seem to get enough self-sufficiency and nowhere near enough of the collaboration in the current classroom model. As Alfie Kohn comedically states, the very fact that collaboration in a classroom could be termed cheating gives you an idea of what the classroom model is actually based on. This competitive classroom model is a reflection of the culture that we live in, but that's changing. Creative roles are going to become more important as technology takes over the means of production and services, as more creative industries will take the lead economically. This is the way the economy is going anyway, so why not do it for the good of the economy, right? The byproduct is that hopefully if schools pursue this line of thought and motivation towards a more collaborative and creative educational model, then they will inadvertently get a more creative, independent and critically thinking public that will be far more likely to have the desire and understanding of the benefits of a scientifically, physically referenced system, aka a resource-based economy. The next issue to deal with is time. The assumption being that homework ought to be useful just because it gives students more time to master the given topic or skill in question. Well, this falls into the age-old trap of quantity over quality, and I think we can all see why this is flawed. In fact, a very depressing thing happened recently. I often tell my students practice doesn't make perfect if you're using the wrong approach. If you're using the wrong approach, you're probably just getting better at doing it badly. So the next time a teacher or a parent says to you, practice makes perfect, I would say that if they want to grow as a human being and learn as well, that they do well from it being pointed out why they may be wrong. A student took on this advice at his local school, and when a teacher said practice makes perfect and he politely corrected him, Guess what happened to this boy? He got a detention. That's great. That's really, really great. Well done, teaching faculty. I salute you. Not. Of course, this is a sad illustration of the current teaching philosophy that we have in our school system. The teacher is God. The truth must pass through them. They are the omnipotent being, the holder of all factual and relevant knowledge that needs to be learnt. Deviation onto a chosen path of interest is prohibited. And of course, this one-size-fits-all aspect fits quite well into the homework model, doesn't it? It's easy for teachers to put out material that they need to cover, not worry about individual student ability, and just set a arbitrary task that they can mark quickly and efficiently so that they have more time to concentrate on preparing students for standardized tests. And again, this is well pointed out by Alfie Kohn, quote, "Let's come at the question from another direction. Instead of asking, does more time for academics help, maybe we should ask, does more time for academics help more than other things we could do instead? A Stanford University study compared 4 different reforms: peer tutoring, smaller classes, increased use of computers, and adding an hour of instruction each day. The result? On a cost-effectiveness basis, the time intervention was found to rank at the bottom with respect to improving student performance in mathematics and third of the 4 in reading." Carol Amez, Dean of the College of Education at Michigan State University, points out that it isn't quantitative changes in behavior, such as requiring students to spend more hours in front of books or worksheets, that help children to learn better. Rather, it's qualitative changes in the way students view themselves in relation to the task, engage in the process of learning, and then respond to the learning activities and situation. In turn, these attitudes and responses on the part of the student emerge from the way teachers think about learning and, as a result, the ways they've organized their classrooms. If the goal is to figure out how best to cover a set curriculum, to fill students with facts, then it might seem appropriate to try to maximize time on task, such as by assigning homework. But that's unlikely to have a positive effect on the critical variables that Amez identifies. Perhaps it makes sense to see education as less about how much the teacher covers and more about what the students can be helped to discover. More time won't do a thing to bring about that shift. I think that last statement is profound and is worth saying again. Perhaps it makes sense to see education as less about how much the teacher covers and more about what the students can be helped to discover. More time won't do a thing to bring about that shift. I couldn't agree more. Besides, why is memorizing information even useful anymore? You can just go online and look it up. This is why how you think and the ability to challenge a legitimate authority is the skill set needed in any truly functional democracy. So once again, it comes back to, we could just say, if you like your system to be democratic and people to be out there to be able to critically think about what they're being told by the media and their government, because that's how, objectively speaking, a democracy is supposed to work, then surely you wouldn't want your students memorizing useless shit. You know, you'd want them to be able to question the useless shit they get told. So we can actually go into the value program that people out there are promoting and say, we agree with your value program. And if you really want those things, wouldn't you say this is a decent way to achieve it? Closely related to time is the notion of practice. The assumption, again, being that more homework is useful because it affords the opportunity for students to practice the skills that they've been taught in class. But this is the defense of a particular type of assignment, one that involves practice. It doesn't matter how many times you practice 2 plus 2, the answer is always going to be 4. However, if you want to be good at tennis and you master the technique of a decent forearm, then the more you practice that, the better you will get at it. However, if you didn't master the technique correctly in the first place, then practicing it is the worst thing you can do. As mentioned earlier, practice does not make perfect. First of all, there's no such thing as perfection, and if you're going about it the wrong way, you're certainly not going to get better at it. The message out there is work hard, not think hard. I always say to people, I say, yeah, so you believe in working hard? Yeah, I believe in working hard. Right, how far do you have to travel to school in the mornings? How long does it take you in the car? Well, about 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, so you drive that 5 or 10 minutes. How long would it take you to walk? And they're like, well, maybe an hour. I'm like, well, walk then. You just said you believe in hard work. Get rid of your car. Oh, and why have you got a dishwasher? I thought you just said you believe in hard work. Why don't you just wash the dishes up by hand? It's harder, isn't it? I'm like, well, yeah, but so sorry, but you don't believe in hard work. Otherwise, you wouldn't take shortcuts. There is nothing wrong with shortcuts. If I could take a magic drumming pill that would make me as good as Joey Jordison on drums, I'd do it. Okay? I don't want to do the hard work to become a great drummer. If there's a shorter way of doing it, I would like to do that, please, because I just want to be wicked at drums, like Peter. But unfortunately, you want to be good at something, it does take hard work. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that if you're not thinking about what you're doing as you're doing it and trying to adjust your method, then you should expect to be frustrated. Because frustration is just really a product of poor approach to the task in question and not thinking about changing your method when it's not working, which is, of course, the bedrock of the scientific process. Therefore, the argument that homework is for practice purposes is only relevant if the task in question needs to be repeated to become automatic. Obedience rather than excellence in problem solving. Convoluted logic. Again pointed out by Alfie Kohn, quote, for example, it wouldn't make sense to say, keep practicing until you understand, because practicing doesn't create understanding, just as giving kids a deadline doesn't teach time management skills. But what kinds of proficiencies lend themselves to this sort of improvement? The answer is behavioral responses. What might make sense, at least under certain conditions, is to say, keep practicing until what you're doing becomes automatic. But what kind of proficiencies lend themselves to this sort of improvement? The answer is behavioral responses. Close quote. In other words, turning human beings into obedient slaves. The next topic is social stratification in education. Just because education is free does not mean it's not subject to this phenomena. For example, if you don't have enough money to send your kids to lots of after-school clubs and activities and give them opportunities of trips away and have more time on your hands to actually spend with them to enrich their lives and enrich their learning experience outside of the school, then your kids are just not going to benefit in the same way the kids who have these opportunities would. And I'm certainly subject to this, as I have to work most evenings teaching the drums in order to pay the bills. Money is freedom. This includes the freedom to bring up your kids how you would like to. If other kids are deprived, though, then so are yours. This is what people seem to miss. It costs money to build big walls and keep out the great unwashed. Take them down and take care of everyone, and in the process you'll get a healthier, less stressed environment for your children and other children to live in. You take care of the many, you take care of the one. And if you take care of the one, you take care of the many. Many of our current approaches to education are subject to culture, not evidence. Standards are slipping. The cure must be more homework, more discipline, more work must be the answer. That's a cultural decision rather than one based on evidence. You want to take a look at the evidence? Just take a look at Finland and Sweden. Totally different approach, better results. More autonomy, better thinking. As pointed out before, standardized tests tend to reward shallow thinking and ultimately make you good at taking tests. But there is in fact a positive correlation between wealth and positive test scores, a 90% one, in fact, in some cases, showing that parents that are rich have more time to help their kids with the homework in question. So if you think about it, this is really another form of structural classism, where the rich families get more time to be able to help their children with their homework, therefore ensuring that they get better grades, better test scores, therefore ensuring that their children can maintain their position in the social economic hierarchy. The last argument to deal with is that it keeps them out of trouble. Listen, right, kids are supposed to be troublesome, playful, and noisy. If you don't like those aspects, then don't have children. It's not a dictatorship. I think this point was made best by Jacques Fresco when he said to someone who had children, "Who are you having them for?" or "What are you having them for?" People have children for many different reasons, but it seems to me that it's because it's the socially accepted thing to do. You get married, you buy a little house, you have some kids. If that's what you want, then fine, I suppose. But shouldn't you be thinking more about the child you're bringing into this world rather than what you want? Shouldn't you be thinking about the sort of environment you're bringing them into? In fact, actually, this notion is comedically pointed out in the film Idiocracy. If you haven't seen this movie, I strongly recommend going and watching it. It is very, very funny. The idea being that the intelligent people say, well, we're going to hold off having kids because the system is a bit loused up. We'd like to get the world a little bit better before we bring children to this world. And the stupid people just keep reproducing because, sex is fun. And eventually the stupid gene takes over and humanity go into complete and total stupid meltdown and start spraying their crops with Gatorade, which is a fizzy drink rather than water. It's a very, very funny film. Unfortunately, I feel like maybe it's starting to become true. So, what's the solutions? Well, the default setting at all schools should be no homework. It should be opting in when it's needed, or if it's something that's going to promote autonomy, creative thinking, or just generally something that the student actually wants to learn in their spare time. Why can't they do this at school is a pretty good question. The homework should be suited to the home, i.e. interview your parents at home about family history. Show your parents what you've learned that day or something that you found interesting that you could work on together with them. Make dinner. Help your mum around the house. Do a job. Show her you care. Show her you love her. Maybe that could be homework. Also, if homework does have to be there, then why not have homework clubs for older kids? This can help them to give them the sort of support that the rich kids get, as well as not infringing on their family life at home. Ultimately, take a stand. I will be writing a letter to both of my child's schools because I am a hypocrite. I do not have the money to send my children to the sorts of schools I would like to send them to, because the system that's all about freedom doesn't give me the freedom to do that. Perhaps if I lived in Finland, it wouldn't be a problem, because even if I did want to send them to private schools, then the government would pay for it, because they have that much confidence in their schools. Unfortunately, my country doesn't have that much confidence. Otherwise, they'd give me the money to send my children to somewhere that's not going to teach them to be a drone. Anyway, I will be trying to address this issue, as I said, by writing a letter. I'm going to be trying to get a template letter together to put up on the Zeitgeist Movement education website, and that will be available for members who have children to go to the activism in schools section and use that template to approach your schools to try to address this issue. The notion of the letter is going to be to say that, look, just trial it. I'll obviously cite the evidence. At least consider how it's given, is what I'm going to say, so as to not affect the intrinsic motivation of a child to learn. It is the responsibility of parents and teachers to question presuppositions, just as we did regarding slavery and the world being flat. It is this which pushes human values and progress forward, and it is one of the hardest things to do. But anything worth doing is always hard. So I'll be back in a few weeks with another radio show, but I'd like to close this show with some very wise words from Ken Robinson. I will see you in a couple of weeks, guys. Take care.
I'm doing a new book at the moment called Epiphany, which is based on a series of interviews with people about how they discovered their talent. I'm fascinated by how people got to be there. It's really prompted by a conversation I had with a wonderful woman who most people have never heard of. She's called Gillian Lynn. Have you heard of her? Some have. She's a choreographer, and everybody knows her work. She did Cats and Phantom of the Opera. She's wonderful. I used to be on the board of the Royal Ballet in England, as you can see. And anyway, Gillian and I had lunch one day. I said, how'd you get to be a dancer? And she said it was interesting. When she was at school, she was really hopeless. And the school in the 30s wrote to her parents and said, we think Gillian has a learning disorder. She couldn't concentrate. She was fidgeting. I think now they'd say she had ADHD. Wouldn't you? But this was the 1930s, and ADHD hadn't been invented, at this point. So it wasn't an available condition. People weren't aware they could have that. anyway, she went to see this this specialist. So this oak-panelled room, and she was there with her mother, and she was led and sat on this chair at the end, and then she sat on her hands for 20 minutes while this man talked to her mother about all the problems Gillian was having at school. And at the end of it, because she was disturbing people, her homework was always late and so on, little kid of 8, in the end, the doctor went and sat next to Gillian and said, Gillian, I've listened to all these things that your mother's told me. I need to speak to her privately. So he said, wait here, we'll be back. We won't be very long. And they went and left her. But as they went out of the room, he turned on the radio that was sitting on his desk. And when they got out of the room, he said to her mother, just stand and watch her. And the minute they left the room, she said she was on her feet, moving to the music. And they watched for a few minutes, and he turned to her mother, and he said, you know, Mrs. Lynn, Gillian isn't sick. She's a dancer. Take her to a dance school. I said, what happened? He said, she did. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. We walked in this room, and it was full of people like me. People who couldn't sit still. People who had to move to think. Who had to move to think. They did ballet, they did tap, they did jazz, they did modern, they did contemporary. She was eventually auditioned for the Royal Ballet School. She became a soloist. She had a wonderful career at the Royal Ballet. She eventually graduated from the Royal Ballet School, found her own company, the Gillian Dance Company, met Andrew Lloyd Webber. She's been responsible for some of the most successful musical theatre productions in history. She's given pleasure to millions, and she's a multi-millionaire. Somebody else might have put her on medication and told her to calm down. Now, I think... What I think it comes to is this. Al Gore spoke the other night about ecology and the revolution that was triggered by Rachel Carson. I believe our only hope for the future is to adopt a new conception of human ecology, one in which we start to reconstitute our conception of the richness of human capacity. Our education system has mined our minds in the way that we strip mine the earth for a particular commodity, and for the future it won't serve us. We have to rethink the fundamental principles on which we're educating our children. There was a wonderful quote by Jonas Salk, who said, if all the insects were to disappear from the earth, within 50 years, all life on earth would end. If all human beings disappeared from the earth, within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish. And he's right. What TED celebrates is the gift of the human imagination. We have to be careful now that we use this gift wisely and that we avert some of the scenarios that we've talked about. And the only way we'll do it is by seeing our creative capacities for the richness they are and seeing our children for the hope that they are. And our task is to educate their whole being so they can face this future. By the way, we may not see this future, but they will. And our job is to help them make something of it. Thank you very much.
Bravo. We're here. Thanks.